Hi AAE 590, my name is Lauren Witowski and I'm hailing here today from Houston, Texas as an online distance student. I wanted to take a few minutes today to talk about the power system upgrades that have been going on with the International Space Station. And I've left my contact information at the bottom of the screen. If you have any questions after this, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to chat. So let's get started. So as an overview, so the current problem and the motivation for the upgrades. So the current nickel hydrogen batteries, which is what we use on ISS, they're severely degraded and they're well past their end of life. The original estimation was actually a few years shorter than we're at right now. So we're fortunate they've performed to this point, but we need to be looking forward since the length of the station mission keeps increasing. So really, the problem is that the batteries are degrading, and the workaround right now is that the efforts are currently at work to go ahead and replace those nickel hydrogen batteries with lithium ion, which are much more modern and much better equipped to handle the loads on ISS. So these are really going to provide us, more reliable power and more predictable performance. So it's just kind of an overview of what we're going to talk about. So the real motivation here is that the nickel hydrogen batteries, they develop a memory over time. And you see this with a lot of older electronics that use batteries. You have like an old phone, you charge it up. After a while, it holds a charge for like 20 minutes. So over time, that actually requires maintenance on ISS because that doesn't go away. And so we do something at NASA called battery reconditioning. So you would perform a capacity test to see how much charge the batteries can hold, and you would recondition them by downcharging them and then recharging them twice. So like I said, the battery capacity degrades over time, and really not only does it degrade to the point where it needs reconditioning every few weeks, but the batteries have degraded over time to the point where now, since the beginning of ISS, we have problems even holding charge after reconditioning. So when you combine this with the degrading solar cells on station, which have been degrading now for 20 years, we don't have a lot of power margin to spare. So the lithium ion batteries, they're going to increase the storage capability, they're going to increase the reliability, and they're going to decrease the maintenance required. Now, the mission, to replace these, it does require an EVA, as I'm sure you've seen, all over the news, actually 2 VAs. And so astronauts have to go out there and physically connect the battery connectors out on the trusses of ISS, and they can only work a few batteries per each EVA, so this is super time consuming. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of the power system of ISS. So in all, there are 8 power channels, and if I can get my little pointer here, so 2 solar array blankets right here constitute a power channel. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 4 on the other side. You have 3 battery sets per channel. So you can see out here on the truss, each one of these channels has 3 battery sets back on the truss. Now what a battery set is, so for nickel hydrogen, for the old batteries, that actually constitutes 2 separate batteries with 38 cells each. For lithium ion, that actually constitutes 1 battery. So those lithium ion batteries are powerful enough that we really only need 1. The current EVA right now is to replace, or I guess the current EVA that just happened, that's to replace 2 channels worth of batteries. So prior to that, we had 2 channels that already had lithium ion batteries, and then when we replace 2 more, we'll end up with 1 whole half of station that's powered by lithium ion. Unfortunately, this will make that half a station a lot more reliable. But, as an overview, these batteries support, like we've talked about in class during the eclipse portion of the orbit. So super important they're reliable. It's super important they work well, because we need these to be reliable since this is the astronaut's home. So some shortcomings of the current nickel hydrogen configuration, and I've kind of touched on them already. So the current batteries are well past their initial intended lifetime. So that, we started ISS 20 years ago. The batteries were supposed to go 10 to 12 years. We've pushed that, and we've pushed that. And the problem is that we have, more visiting vehicles coming. We have, our risk from failure response is greater. We've got more payloads. We've got more visiting vehicles. We're supporting, 24/7 astronaut ops. And really just the danger of being in low power situations is too great at this point to ignore the state the batteries are in. So like I mentioned earlier, the batteries do need a constant upkeep, like I mentioned, to maintain that ability to charge. So they develop that memory over time, and then, the schedule at NASA is once every 2 weeks or so, they perform a capacity test for each set of batteries. So the cool thing about lithium ion is they don't have to perform that capacity test because they are so reliable even as they age. But for nickel hydrogen batteries, they do have to do that. And more often than not, they find that they have to perform reconditioning. So they'll discharge them twice and then they'll recharge them. And that kind of resets the memory that the battery has. Unfortunately, when you do that, that actually takes the battery offline. So, like I mentioned, normally your power channel has 3 sets of batteries. Well, when you take that offline, you're down to 2 sets. So, if you've got a channel that's maybe one of your core channels, or it's got a lot of core avionics on it, it's not exactly a situation you want to be in, because if you've got one set offline and then another set fails, it just compounds from there. So, like I mentioned, with 2 batteries in each set, you're kind of at 0 fault tolerance for being in a power positive state. There are corrective actions that you could take, but it's really just not a situation you want to be in. And here at NASA, the engineering counterparts have mentioned that a lot of the batteries on station, because they are so old, they only have about a year-ish left before they just won't really charge to a point that they're useful. So got a lot of issues here. We're trying to solve them. So I want to take a second to talk about what the current battery power profile looks like, because I know it's something we've talked about in class. So this right here is an SOC plot that I pulled just from real-time data. And so right here you can see the battery enters eclipse, and the SOC is going down while it supplies power to the power channels. And right here, this is for one channel, so we have 3 battery sets. That's why we have 3 lines, and you can see that over in the side in the legend. But down here, down at the valley, that's when we come into insulation, and then when we go up, that's when the batteries charge. And you see this little knee over at the top, and that's a charge reduction state where the batteries are full, but they're kind of like trickle charging. And then once we hit, let me get my little pointer back, once we hit the top here, that's when we hit eclipse again, and it goes down. And you can see this just continues all the way on. And so sometimes you'll have lower valleys than other, so maybe other orbits. So maybe these orbits down here, you had a lot more power draw. Maybe these orbits here, you didn't have as much going on. So this is what a normal power profile looks like. Now, when your batteries start to degrade and start to not hold as much charge, what you'll see is down here your valleys will look the same, but the top of your charging profile is going to start to look really funky. So it's going to be kind of like a weird jagged edge sort of looking thing. And that's what clues the flight controllers on the ground to think, hey, maybe we should do some capacity testing. So like I mentioned, the replacement plan is they're going to replace each set of 2 nickel hydrogen batteries with 1 lithium ion. And because they've got that extra space out there from the second battery, they just use an adapter plate to hold that lithium ion in place. Like I said, this does require an EVA, which you've probably seen on the news in the last few weeks. And the big thing to note is that when these batteries are being replaced on the EVA, we have to safe the batteries out on the truss for the astronauts to be handling them. So they will typically power down those batteries, and they will do what's called a seamless tie to a different channel on station. So that's a situation where you have one power channel actually powering 2 sets or 2 channels worth of loads. So that's kind of even a dicier situation, because if something were to happen on that one channel that's now feeding 2 channels worth of stuff, it can really kind of snowball and make a mess. So that's the configuration they have when they're doing the EVA. And then as soon as they're done with the EVA, they start the checkout process and they work to get those batteries up and running to get out of that configuration. Now, when they start that checkout process, they start by charging the batteries super slowly to make sure that there's nothing wrong with them. And if there is, they can pull them offline, do some more testing, and then hopefully get them charged back up. So like I mentioned before, I just wanted to show real quick. So I mentioned the power profile, and this is right here for all 8 channels on station. But I mentioned the power profile for the nickel hydrogen batteries kind of knees over at the top. Well, with the lithium ion batteries, you're going to see what we call bad ears, where they're going to spike really, really sharply at the top when they're fully charged. And that's because lithium-ion batteries, when they're calculating their SOC and how much charge they have, instead of using just like a temperature pressure calculation like nickel hydrogen does, they actually use a moving average of the cell voltage. And so when they reach the top of their charge, that average is still going. So that's why you see that little sharp point there while the average corrects itself until it realizes how much the batteries are actually charged. So just wanted to wrap up with some conclusions. So like I mentioned, like you can probably figure out, the lithium-ion batteries can support a lot greater power needs on ISS. They don't really need as much maintenance. They don't need all the capacity testing and the reconditioning that the nickel hydrogen batteries currently do. And so the EVA that just happened, that was to replace half of the it was to replace 2 sets of batteries, which would result in half of the batteries on station being lithium-ion. And the eventual plan is to be able to replace all the batteries on station with lithium-ion to really decrease the workload on the power team to upkeep the batteries and just be able to support visiting vehicles and bigger payloads and all the science that's going on. So that's all I have. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.